Hello and welcome to the Karate Priest Podcast. I'm your host, Father Daniel Duplantis. I'm a martial artist, musician, airman, and a priest of the Diocese of Houma-Thibodaux. One of my other passions in life is teaching, especially teaching about the Catholic faith. Catholicism is a very deep faith. Jesus himself told Peter to put out into the deep for a catch. The most significant answers to life's most important questions often lie deep beneath the surface. Many people have questions about their faith. Through this podcast, my aim is to explore these questions and encounter incredible people along the way. Their stories show that God is constantly at work in our lives every single day, sometimes in the ordinary and sometimes in the extraordinary. Some of the topics treated in this podcast may be sensitive or controversial, but their discussion holds the key to truly living as God created us to live, which is to say that He created us to live in authentic freedom, loving Him above all else. Thank you for joining me on this journey of faith, and I hope you enjoy this podcast. Hey guys, and welcome to the Karate Priest Podcast. I'm Father Daniel Duplantis, the Karate Priest. I'd like to start today with a reading from Matthew's Gospel. This is from Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 through 30. For it will be as when a man going on a journey called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 more talents. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also who had the 2 talents came forward, saying, Master, you have delivered to me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also who had received the 1 talent came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you did not winnow. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sowed, and gather where I have not winnowed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have abundance. But from him who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness, where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth. I begin with this passage, this parable of the talents, for a very specific reason. I'd like to frame this first episode, this kind of introduction, who is the karate priest, around the idea of using our God-given gifts and talents. It's basically what's been happening with my ministry lately, is being able to take all these things that I've been given from the Lord and to really use them in my ministry and to really reap some very, very fantastic fruits. All of these gifts kind of have a backstory: the martial arts, the military, music, priesthood. And so what I'd like to kind of do is just start with a general snapshot of who am I? Who is this karate priest? and then kind of go into my story. How did I get to using all these gifts? How do we get to having a Karate Priest podcast and acknowledging several of these things along the way? So I was born and raised in Houma, Louisiana. I'm a cradle Catholic. So I was Catholic from birth and baptized as a baby. I have a twin brother and a younger sister. And so kind of with going into some of these gifts, I have a 3rd degree black belt in Taekwondo. I'm a 2nd lieutenant in the United States Air Force, and I was ordained a priest on June 6th of last year at the age of 26. That's a little bit of a snapshot. So how do we get to all this? My vocation story goes way back to when I was younger. A question that I'm often asked is, when did you know? When did you know that you wanted to be a priest? When did the call first kind of come up? And we do call it a vocation. It means it is a call. It's something that you feel that comes from outside of yourself, or even from within yourself in a way, from an outside source. And so for me, that calling came around the age of about 3 or 4 years old. Before I was in school, my grandparents would babysit me, and they had these church supply catalogs. And I remember very young going through these catalogs and picking out chalices, vestments, the altarware, all these kind of things. We had a fantastic priest who baptized me, gave me my first communion growing up, who really just was on fire. And I remember going to mass on the weekends and just seeing this priest who was so on fire, very inspirational, very joyful, and thinking to myself, I want that. I don't know what he has, but I just want it. And it was just something that caught fire with me. And I remember when he was reassigned, not long after my first communion, he called my mother and said, can you bring the twins to the rectory? I have a gift for them before I leave. And he gave us each one of his stoles. And I still have that stole to this day. The stole is the kind of the thing that he wears around his neck. And so he saw the vocation in at least one of us. And it's safe to say he was right. So again, a very young age where that call comes from. The origins of me doing martial arts. I started doing Taekwondo in 2001 at the age of 7. So this year's actually makes 20 years that I've been doing Taekwondo. With that, doing some Hapkido, some Judo in between. And so I've been doing martial arts for the majority of my life. Kind of, again, on the road to priesthood, I began altar serving in the 4th grade and served almost every single weekend from that time up until I graduated high school. My gift of music came in the 5th grade when I started a 5th grade band playing saxophone, something I did all the way through high school into my first year of college. And then the military, where's the origins of that? First became interested in the military really around 6th grade. I have an uncle who had married into the family when I was in 2nd grade, and he was in the Army. And so anytime he was assigned stateside, that base was normally where my family would evacuate for hurricanes, which is a very prevalent problem here in Louisiana. We don't evacuate for every hurricane, but if they become major hurricanes or they become, dangerous enough, we'll make the decision to go and evacuate. So we would visit him a couple of times in Oklahoma when he was assigned at Fort Sill. But 6th grade was really when I kind of started thinking about the military as a career too, just kind of being interested in it, playing some World War II video games I was given, doing a lot of research into the military. And so when I got to high school, I joined the Junior Reserve Officer Training Corps for 2 years to kind of get my feet wet in the military environment, to learn what is it like, what's the system like. Really enjoyed that. So I want you to keep all these things in mind, because again, these are the foundations for a lot of the things I'm doing in my ministry today. And they developed very organically over time. And so discernment of priesthood, how does one go about praying whether or not you're called to the priesthood? For me, it really started seriously in 8th grade. I felt the call very early, but to say I started seriously thinking about priesthood was really in the 8th grade. And I remember going to my first diocesan youth rally when I was in 8th grade. So this is high school age. It was at the local university. It was a one-day kind of retreat thing. They had games, they had conferences and talks, and it ended with mass. And I remember sitting there in the mass and watching almost all of the priests from my diocese walking in for mass, and many of them being very joyful, just smiling. And there was just something about them, a je ne sais quoi, we would say, and I don't know what, that they all just had. And I was like, they have something I want. Again, kind of going back to that first priest that baptized me, they have something that I want, that I desire for myself. this joy, this just sense of peace. And again, that kind of fire starts kindling again in 8th grade. The next year in 9th grade, I go to a festival called Abbey Youth Fest, which was at the college seminary in Louisiana. And for most of these festivals, what they would do is they'd have an altar call. So if you were interested in becoming a priest, a religious, something along those lines, they would invite you up to the stage, they would pray over you, and then they'd send you off with one of the priests to go get your contact information, give you some vocation discernment information. So you have something to leave with to kind of help you unpack this call, this possible vocation. So at Abbey Youth Fest in 9th grade, I didn't go up for the vocation call. And I happened to be sitting next to one of my best friends from high school. And she looked over at me and she said, Dan, I'm really surprised you didn't go up. And it was funny because I was kind of thinking about it, but I wasn't sure. And so I said, okay, I'll go at the youth rally, because youth rally was like 2 weeks later. And so I did that year at the diocesan youth rally. A year after I went to my first one, I go up for the vocations call. And now look, guys, I went to public school growing up. And so, but being in South Louisiana, it's a very, very Catholic area. A lot of my friends from high school were at that youth rally. I had many classmates from high school who were there. And so I go up there in front of all my peers, in front of all my friends. My parents were chaperoning that day. And so they saw me go up for the vocations call. It was very, very nerve wracking. They take us in the back, get our info. I'll come out with this packet of information and stuff. And then I see my parents, and I'm thinking, oh God, how's this going to go? So, I walk up to my mom and dad, and my dad just kind of goes, so you thinking about it? I said, yeah, I'm thinking about it, didn't give too much thought into it for a while afterwards. I looked at the materials at home, just kind of sifted through them, but really didn't pick up anything to do again with discernment for a couple of years after that, for about 2 more years. It was around this time now in sophomore, junior year of high school, I finally got my first degree black belt in Taekwondo. It took 8.5 years. Normally, you have to wait until you're 16 to get a first Dan black belt in Taekwondo. Before that, you could have a junior black belt, what we would call a Poom belt. But we skipped Poom and went straight to first Dan. And so at 16, my brother and I got our first degree black belts. And then around that time also, we're getting ready for confirmation, receiving the sacrament of confirmation. In my diocese, we typically receive the sacrament of confirmation in 11th grade, your junior year of high school. And so I had been dating a little bit at that time. I dated a few girls sophomore, junior year. Come around to confirmation retreat, which was right after New Year in 2011, my junior year of high school. And I had an incredible experience at confirmation retreat. And it was the first time I got to meet a seminarian, really, because I'd never met one before. We prayed for them, growing up. We prayed for more priests. But to say I had never met a seminarian before this time, it's kind of almost strange to think now. We have so many seminarians in our diocese that are really just present to youth nowadays. That almost every high schooler that goes to Mass has at some point met a seminarian, at least by the time they get to probably the 9th or 10th grade. So I met the seminarian, who is now Father Bryce Higginbotham, and he also introduced me to Father Joey Palola, who was our vocation director at one point. And Father Joey really showed me how you can use music in your priestly ministry. He could play guitar, he could play recorder, he played violin. Very, very talented at everything he put his hands to. And so I was really inspired to continue looking at this idea of priesthood, considering that, I really enjoyed playing music. It was also around that time that Father Joey helped me get involved with a group called Ignite. And Ignite is a high school boys discernment group. It's a group of guys that, just like me, were thinking about priesthood. You're not committing to seminary. You're simply looking for resources, looking for a support group to pray with you to figure out, is this what God's calling me to do? And so with that, I go to the first meeting and I see guys I've met from other schools through different activities. Some guys I knew through Quiz Bowl, some guys I knew from marching band and honor bands and things of that nature. And so it was a group of guys that was very relatable, guys that I was like, okay, they're like me. I'm not alone in discerning this call. And so I was involved with that group for a while. Now, being involved with this group, they made it very clear that, we're not committing to seminary in this group. So if we're dating, it's fine. Just to let our girlfriend know that, hey, this is a possibility. I'm in this discernment group. I'm thinking about this, just to let you know, so it's on the radar, that this is kind of in the back of my mind. This is something that's on my heart. It was around that time that I dated one girl that I'll go into a little detail of that relationship, Caroline. Caroline went to one of our local Catholic high schools, and we had known each other for 3 years at this point from different honor bands we participated in together. And we were head over heels for each other, apparently from the moment we met. The only problem was for 3 years, we didn't tell each other. And so she had actually told me first that she liked me. And so we dated for a week. And I told her I was in this discernment group. And so we dated for a week. And at the end of that week, she said, Dan, we need to talk. I'm thinking, oh God, here we go. Here's my dear John. And sure enough, that it was the breakup. But the way she did it was incredible. She said, Danny, she said, I've liked you for these last 3 years. And she said, this is one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. She says, I had a dream last night that you were a priest and you heard my confession. She said, I've been fighting the feelings all week. She said, I just feel like you belong to God and you belong to the church. And I just feel it in my heart that I'm holding you back from the seminary. And I'm sitting there thinking, wow, like this is incredible. So we left on great terms. We broke up on fantastic terms. In fact, a couple years later, I actually ended up serving in her wedding as a seminarian, which was super cool. She married a great Catholic guy, and they've been doing well ever since. So then that transitions me into my senior year of high school. And so this is a time where, many of you have probably been there already, where you're trying to decide, what am I going to do after high school? What's that next step going to be? And so for me, I'm laying out my options. I could go to the seminary, right out of high school. I still wanted to pursue something with music. So, music school was on the table. And then with the military, I still really wanted to be in the military. And so, I had my uncle and other people talk to me about possibly applying to West Point Military Academy. In fact, at that time, I had a two-star general who was here in Homa in the National Guard who offered and said, if I needed a letter of recommendation, he would write one. And so I'm trying to, weigh all these options. And it's at that time I met a girl. So I had, this last dating relationship my senior year. I said, Lord, this is my last year of high school. I said, she's the last one. This is the last girlfriend. We're either getting married or I'm going to go to the seminary. And the thing is, when you make these deals with God, he always seems to win. To put it that way, he always seems to win in the end. So if you're tempted to make a deal with God, just be prepared. No matter what, he really wins in these things. So we dated for a year and a half, actually. So with that decision, when I graduated high school, I said, you know what? Let me go to music school. Let me go somewhere, kind of close to home, pursue a career in music and see how this dating relationship goes. So I go to McNeese, and I was absolutely miserable. Our relationship at that point was long distance. As a first-time freshman, I was taking 21 credit hours in just one semester. And those of you who know what credit hours are, you're probably scratching your head at me right now thinking, what were you thinking, Father? And that's the thing, I really don't know. I didn't know what I was getting myself into at 21 credit hours. Because I was in the marching band, I was in the wind symphony, I was in the honors college taking extra credits for that. I was working as a band librarian 10 hours a week. When I sat down and did the math of what was my week like, I basically had a 50-hour week before homework. And so it was nuts. It was absolutely crazy. I remember Tuesdays, waking up at 6 a.m, going to get breakfast at 7, not really getting to start my homework until about 10 o'clock that night because of having a full day of wind symphony rehearsal, marching band rehearsal, working in the band library, doing the copying and filing of music. It was crazy. And just with the long distance, my girlfriend and I were not doing well at all. And so I was at some point, I told myself, something's got to give. Something's got to change. I'm just miserable. And so, I figured, now's the time, I should have stopped running from the seminary from the start. And so my girlfriend and I were not doing well. So I decided to end things with her. And in that space, I said, you know what, Lord, I made a deal with you. I said, she was the last girlfriend. So I applied to the seminary. Funny day that was. The day I applied to the seminary was February 11th, 2013. And it's a very specific day I remember because it was the day that Pope Benedict had announced he was resigning. And so what a day to start this whole process of going to the seminary. It was crazy. And I remember sitting with the vocation director that day, joking about, he found that you were applying. And so the Pope just said, I'm done. I've had it. I'm getting out the way of this guy. but it was that's the day that this whole seminary thing started. And so with that, I finished the application, began seminary in the fall of 2013, and had stayed in for 7 years until ordination. So that's kind of how I got to the seminary. With that, not long afterwards was where the military kind of crept back in. So remember in high school, I did 2 years of JROTC. So when I entered the seminary, my uncle, who was in the Army, he said, Dan, I really think you ought to at least do some research and look into military chaplaincy. He said, we really need priests in the military right now, and there's a huge shortage. So I really took him up on that. So I started looking at the Army, Navy, and Air Force chaplain corps and looking at what does a chaplain do? What's their responsibilities? What's life like for a chaplain? And so with that, I met with my bishop and asked him, I said, is this something that, you'd be okay with me pursuing? And he was very much okay with it. And so he allowed me to attend a discernment retreat in 2015 with the Archdiocese for the Military Services, who provide the faculties for priests in the military. And so I went to Menlo Park, California, to St. Patrick's Seminary for a weekend retreat to meet chaplains and get to ask them questions. What's it like? So it was at that point I had declared for the Air Force. And then a year later, when I graduated from the college seminary with my bachelor's degree, I commissioned on June 11th, 2016, as a second lieutenant in the chaplain candidate program. And so with there, my training has kind of been just in the summers. What happens as a chaplain candidate, you're a graduate seminary student. And so you're a full-time student in a graduate seminary. And so we're in what's called the Ready Reserve program. So we tend to train just in the summers. So my summer assignments, the first one was boot camp. That was the summer of 2017. So I went to commissioned officer training at Maxwell Air Force Base, which is in Montgomery, Alabama. It was a 5-week program, and it was basically learning how to be an officer in the military. And so we did 5 weeks of that, which would probably be another episode for this podcast of what happens at boot camp. But then also the second part of that summer, we did another 5 weeks of just the chaplain candidates, where as a squadron, they took us base hopping. I think we went to 8 different bases in 5 states in the span of 35 days. It was really, really cool to go behind the scenes and get to meet different units and what do they do in the military. So we got to see units like our military working dogs, the people who train the dogs in the military. We got to see the hurricane hunters in Keesler Air Force Base in Mississippi. So we got to meet explosive ordnance disposal. That's our bomb squad guys. So we got to really go behind the scenes, which was really cool that summer. So then after that, your next several summers, you spend doing these kind of internship tours where you're assigned to one base for the duration of your 5-week tour. And you kind of just shadow the chaplains there. So in 2019, I was ordained a deacon. And so I was assigned to Keesler Air Force Base in Mississippi. Again, that's where the hurricane hunters are. It's the guys who, when you see the spaghetti models on the Weather Channel, they're the guys who kind of put that together. They go out, collect data from the storms, pass them on to the National Hurricane Center. And then also the next summer when I was ordained a priest, I spent my first full month of priesthood at Barksdale Air Force Base up in Bossier City, which is by Shreveport, Louisiana. Barksdale is home to the B-52 Stratofortress bomber. So it was really cool to get to see the bombers up close in person. And to work with those chaplains and really kind of get, a sense of what's it like being a priest in the military. Again, I was still just a chaplain candidate at this time, but because I was already a priest, there's a lot of overlap with things I can do even as a candidate. So I was able to celebrate mass, hear confessions, do all these things that priests can normally do. So again, with that, those were around the time I was ordained. And so my ordination dates was May 25th, 2019 to the diaconate. So actually today is my ordination to the diaconate. We're actually recording this podcast on May 25th right now. And so today makes 2 years of my diaconate ordination, and my anniversary to the priesthood is June 6th of 2020. And so once I was ordained a priest, my first assignment was college ministry. I was assigned to St. Thomas Aquinas Catholic Student Center at Nicholas State University, which is in Thibodaux, Louisiana, so about a half-hour drive from Houma. And the way I ended up there was with the pandemic. I ended up finishing my last semester of seminary, living in residence at the university. They let us leave the seminary to finish our studies virtually. And so with that, I go to Nichols, and I'm there with the college kids who, the seniors there are in the same boat as me, finishing our last semester of studies. before graduation in the midst of a global pandemic. And then so since I was there as a deacon for a little bit, the bishop said, let's just kind of keep you there. And so that was my first assignment as a priest. It was at that time that I really started getting back into Taekwondo. So whenever I graduated high school, it was kind of difficult to keep doing training with college work. So it took me another 4 years after getting my first degree to get my second degree black belt. So I trained in the summer of my first summer assignment as a seminarian. So in 2014, I got my second degree black belt. But when I got to St. Thomas, I was able to return to Taekwondo. There was a school that trained at Pelche Park, which was right behind the university. And we had one of our college students was already training there. And so he invited me to come back in. Their instructor had actually been one of my judges for my second degree test. So they welcomed me with open arms. So I really got back into Taekwondo. They were able to test me for my third degree black belt in December of this past year. And so I've been with them as an instructor at Thibodeau Taekwondo ever since then. So kind of with that, how did the karate priest come about? This is something that goes back really to high school. When I was in high school, my sophomore year, I was asked to read the morning announcements. I don't know how I got picked. I really don't. The assistant principal just walked in the band room one day and asked for me and the senior and said, hey, we'd like for you guys to read the morning announcements. And so I did that for 3 years in high school. And so I got very comfortable behind a microphone. And I even had a physics teacher who said he hoped one day to see me on the news as an anchor or something in that capacity. So it's funny how like that happened in high school. 2 years ago, I was asked to go on the Church Universal. It's a program on EWTN, which is Eternal Word Television Network, to do a special for the co-sponsored seminarian program for the Archdiocese of the Military. And so I go on the show, and EWTN reaches global audiences. And so I'm on TV really for the first time on a global audience. From there, my bishop asked me to take his place one day on the local radio show, just because he knew I was comfortable behind microphones and be able to do that. And then when I was ordained a deacon, just, after, starting to preach a little bit, I had people who told me that, they wanted to see me do something, whether it be a podcast, write a book, do something on YouTube. They just wanted me to do something, especially in regards to like teaching things about the faith or talking about the faith. So it was around this time also that I met someone that some of you might follow. And if you don't follow her yet, I encourage you to do so, is Amber Rose Schneider, also known as the Religious Hippie. She had asked me to go on an episode of her podcast, which is how I met Todd Fisher, who is my producer now and was Amber's producer as well, who encouraged me to get into this podcasting business. And so that's where the groundwork for the Karate Priest really started. Where did the name come from is also a really cool story. I have a friend who teaches first grade religion in Baton Rouge. And she wanted me to do a virtual lesson with her students on baptism. I ended up falling sick that morning, so I couldn't do the lesson. But she had kind of introduced me to the kids a little bit, showed them how I do Taekwondo and showed them some photos and videos. So they started calling me the Karate Priest. And a few months ago, she had asked me if I had any live stream masses to do for the kids. And I was on vacation at the time, so I was away from all of my computer and mass stuff. And she said the kids were so disappointed that the Karate Priest did not have a mass that day. And so that's how the name came about, was the Karate Priest. It just kind of stuck. So to really kind of tie all this together, it's really incredible to look back at my life to see where these gifts started and how I'm using them in my ministry. So the reason why I started off this episode with the parable of the talents. Back in those days, a talent was a sum of money. But because of just the connotation it's gotten from these readings, we call things like our gifts, we call them talents. It's something that we're responsible for. It comes from that particular passage in the Gospels. It's something that when we're given these things by the Lord to be able to use. And so all these gifts, even in priesthood, I've been able to use these things, to go back and look at how they developed throughout the course of my life. So this June 11th makes 5 years that I've been in the Air Force. I've been teaching martial arts at Thibodeau Taekwondo during class time and also outside of class. I have friends who come to the cathedral where I'm now assigned to use the school gym here on Sundays, and we'll do some extra training. which has been fantastic. And then finally, with this podcast, really just kind of fell into my lap. It's just been amazing to see the ways that all these gifts have kind of tied together now at one point in my life, early on in my priesthood, to be able to reach people, to share the gospel, to really engage in this new evangelization, which in a sense has to go back to our roots of what the church does. We just celebrated Pentecost Sunday this past weekend. And with that, to see how the church had to go out to the ends of the earth. And we have to do the same thing nowadays. And so being able to use these gifts and talents to engage the culture, to engage people, to re-engage this new evangelization has really been such a blessing. And I can honestly say that I'm really just living my best life as a priest, doing all of these things, using all these gifts and talents. These are the things that kind of made me the person I am. And so with that, it's been great to use all of these things to really bring people to Jesus and bring Jesus to people. And so that's the challenge for each and every one of us. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, but we absolutely should know ourselves well enough to know what our gifts are and to use them to change the world. That's what evangelization is all about. You know, I imagine the apostles who came from, some of them from different walks of life. Many of them were fishermen. You had Matthew, who was a tax collector. You had Paul, who was a tent builder. Luke became a companion of Paul, and Luke was a physician. He was a doctor. You know, they were able to use all of these things, all of these gifts they have been given to evangelize, to go out and to change the world around them. And that's how Christianity spread. That's how the good news, the gospel spread. And so that is my hope for this podcast, to be able to take these gifts and these talents to really show people that, hey, first of all, priests are normal people. You know, we have gifts and talents, you know, we have things that we like to do. But to say that these are gifts for me to really go out and to bear fruit, and to hopefully to take these maybe 5 talents that I have and go out and make, you know, 5 more. But hopefully to invest in the church and to say that, you know, that there's so much joy, there's so much hope for the church today, and to really go out and to be the saints that we're called to be. We're all called to be saints. It's something that, you know, it's not an option. It is a call. It is an invocation. It's a vocation and an invitation. But it is something that we're all absolutely called to do. We're all called to be saints. And so the question for us again is, what are our gifts and talents, and how can we use those things to grow the kingdom of God? So with that, brings us to the end of our episode for today. I do want to give a little bit of a preview for next week's episode. I'll be talking about a week in the life of a priest. What does a priest do besides saying Mass on Sundays? And so with that, I hope you all enjoyed today's episode, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of The Karate Priest. If you enjoyed this podcast, go ahead and like The Karate Priest on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you're ever in South Louisiana, come visit me at the Cathedral of St. Francis de Sales in Houma. If you have any questions or comments about the show, you can also email me at thekaratepriest@gmail.com. Your questions are welcomed and may be used in future episodes. May the blessing of Almighty God, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit come down on you and remain with you forever. Amen.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. Please be sure to rate and review this episode. This podcast is produced by Todd Fisher and distributed by Metacortex Publishing. This podcast is copyright. Any previously trademarked or copyright content is used by permission. Information and opinions stated in this podcast should not be construed as medical advice. Please be sure to visit the official website for the International Association of Metatomics at metatomics.org, or find us on social media for other unique content.